In the early 1920s, Italy was restless. The First World War had left the country wounded, its economy collapsing, its people angry and divided. Into this chaos stepped Benito Mussolini, a fiery speaker who promised order, power, and the rebirth of a Roman Empire. He called himself Il Duce, the leader, and millions rallied to his side. At first, Mussolini appeared to deliver. Trains ran on time, cities filled with parades, marches, and rallies. Italian newspapers glorified him. Photographs captured his dramatic poses, and his speeches echoed through radios across the nation. Propaganda painted him not as a politician, but as a savior. Crowds roared his name. Children saluted him in classrooms. Families displayed his portrait in their homes. Italy was in his grip, not just through power, but through adoration. But this loyalty came at a price. Behind the cheering crowds were prisons filled with his critics, newspapers silenced by censors, and opponents beaten by his black-shirt militias. Italians lived under a government of fear. Still, the illusion of strength held for nearly 2 decades. Mussolini was everywhere, on posters, in films, in slogans repeated by schoolchildren. He promised to make Italy strong, to reclaim its glory, to stand shoulder to shoulder with great powers. And, for a time, many Italians believed him. Even those who disliked him often stayed silent, convinced resistance was impossible. But Mussolini's greatest gamble would shatter everything. In 1940, he led Italy into the Second World War on Hitler's side, boasting that victory was certain. Instead, disaster followed. Italian armies faltered in Greece, North Africa, and later on their own soil. Cities were bombed, factories collapsed, families went hungry. Italy's young men were sent to battlefields they could not win, many never to return. Slowly, the chants of "Duce, Duce" grew quieter. Behind closed doors, whispers of betrayal began. For ordinary Italians, the man who had once promised glory had delivered only ruin. By the early 1940s, Mussolini was no longer seen as a hero, but as a tyrant dragging Italy to destruction. Even within his own fascist party, loyalty was cracking. Ministers who once feared him now questioned his judgment. Generals whispered about incompetence. The king himself began to plot behind the scenes. Mussolini's cult of personality had made him untouchable for nearly 2 decades, but by 1943, Italy's suffering had reached a breaking point. And soon, the people who once cheered his name would be the same ones demanding his downfall. By 1943, Mussolini's promises of glory had turned into catastrophe. His armies had stumbled across every front. In Greece, Italian forces were humiliated until German divisions arrived to bail them out. In North Africa, Rommel's Afrika Korps fought fiercely, but Italy's poorly equipped soldiers were slaughtered or captured by the tens of thousands. At home, Allied bombers reduced Italian cities to rubble. Naples, Milan, and Rome all endured devastating raids. Civilians were killed in the thousands, food lines stretched for blocks, and factories stood silent. Ordinary Italians no longer saw Mussolini as a savior, they saw him as the architect of their suffering. The breaking point came in July 1943, when Allied forces landed in Sicily. It was a direct invasion of Italian soil, and morale collapsed overnight. Italian soldiers deserted, villages welcomed the Allies, and the myth of Mussolini's invincibility was shattered. For years, Mussolini had boasted that his empire would rival ancient Rome, but now, with Sicily lost, the Italian mainland threatened, and his German allies treating Italy as a junior partner, his empire looked more like a prison. Even his most loyal followers began to see the end approaching. On July 24, 1943, Mussolini convened a meeting of the Fascist Grand Council, expecting loyalty. Instead, he faced rebellion. One by one, members who had once cheered his speeches now condemned him. They accused him of dragging Italy into a disastrous war, of losing touch with reality, of failing to protect the nation. By dawn, the council voted to remove him from power. The betrayal stunned Mussolini. He still believed his position untouchable, his image too powerful to challenge, but even as he left the meeting, his fate was sealed. The very next day, Mussolini went to meet King Victor Emmanuel III, expecting reassurance. Instead, the king dismissed him coldly. "My dear Duce," the monarch reportedly said, "you are the most hated man in Italy." In that moment, Mussolini's 20-year reign ended not with a revolution, but with a betrayal from the very institutions that had once protected him. He was arrested and quietly escorted away. As news spread, Italians poured into the streets, not in protest, but in celebration. Crowds cheered, bells rang, and people tore down Mussolini's portraits. For the first time in 2 decades, Italians spoke freely. The man who had once seemed invincible was now a prisoner. His fall revealed what many had secretly felt. Mussolini had lost not only the war, but the loyalty of his people. In a matter of days, the Duce went from untouchable dictator to discarded figurehead. And for Italy, the betrayal of 1943 was only the beginning of his downfall. After his arrest in 1943, Mussolini's story might have ended quietly in captivity, but Hitler refused to let his ally go. In a daring commando raid, German paratroopers rescued Mussolini from a mountaintop hotel and flew him north. The price of freedom was humiliation. Hitler installed him as the head of the Italian Social Republic, a Nazi puppet regime based in Salo on Lake Garda. Italians saw through the charade. Mussolini was no longer Il Duce, no longer a leader, he was simply Hitler's servant, ruling over a fractured country occupied by German troops. For Italians suffering under Nazi control, Mussolini was not a savior, but a collaborator. The man who once promised an empire now symbolized foreign domination. As the war dragged on, partisan fighters grew stronger. Across northern Italy, armed bands of workers, peasants, and students attacked German convoys, sabotaged rail lines, and executed fascist officials. Ordinary Italians sheltered them, fed them, and joined their ranks. Every partisan bullet was also aimed at Mussolini. His name became a curse whispered in the streets. Italians no longer feared him, they hated him. The resistance wasn't just a fight against Germany, but against the dictator who had led them into ruin. By April 1945, Hitler's Reich was collapsing. Soviet forces stormed Berlin, Allied troops pushed through northern Italy, and Germany's armies crumbled. Mussolini, aging and defeated, tried to flee with his mistress, Clara Petacci, and a small group of loyal fascists. Disguised in a German greatcoat and helmet, he attempted to slip across the Swiss border. But at the village of Dongo, partisans stopped the convoy. Even in disguise, Mussolini was recognized. The once mighty Duce, who had marched into Rome with thousands of followers in 1922, was now dragged out of a truck, trembling, a fugitive caught in flight. On April 28, 1945, Mussolini and Clara Petacci were executed by firing squads in Giulino di Mesegra. Clara clung to him, refusing to be separated. Both fell against a villa wall, riddled with bullets. Their bodies, along with other fascist leaders, were loaded onto a truck and taken to Milan's Piazzale Loreto. There, in the very square where fascists had once executed partisans, Mussolini's corpse was hung upside down at a gas station. Crowds gathered, not in mourning, but in rage. They spat, threw stones, and mutilated the bodies. It was a brutal, symbolic act. Mussolini's people had once saluted him with pride. Now they reduced him to a spectacle of vengeance. Mussolini wasn't destroyed by foreign armies. He was destroyed by his own people, betrayed by his council, abandoned by his king, despised by his nation. His downfall was the clearest proof of why Italians turned against him. His promises of an empire had brought only war, hunger, and occupation. And when his power collapsed, the fear that once protected him vanished. The Duce had ruled with spectacle, and in the end, his death became one. What are your thoughts on this? Let us know in the comments below. And if you liked this video, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel.